Welcome back. It is human nature to sometimes prefer particular things and people more than others. Well, our next guests say we're all biased to some degree, even if we don't set out to be that way. Well, this husband and wife team have co-authored a new book called Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Our Differences. We welcome Tiffany Janum and Matthew Freeman to Virginia this morning. Folks, it's great to see you. Happy holidays.
Thanks.
You. All right, what precipitated this? What was the impetus for writing this book?
So we do management consulting for a living. We have a diversity consulting firm. And as we're sort of moving through with our clients, we often find that people want to be better than they are. They want to know more about, how they can uncover their biases and what they can do about it. So it's really a very practical instructional manual on how to identify your specific biases and do something about it.
Now, Matthew said in the book that we all inherently have some sort of bias, right?
Sure, and there's actually nothing wrong with having bias. It just means a preference for one thing over the other. So you may have a preference for snowy vacations or warm beach vacations, but when it comes to people, that's where it gets a little tricky. And there are biases that all of us have, just people that we trust more naturally than others. And that's just part of the way the brain is wired. Some people, it's easy.
Is it difficult to admit that you have some biases?
We have made it very difficult yes. in this country and in this culture to admit that. We've politicized it, you can get fired for it, and so it becomes a very difficult conversation to have.
Where do you begin that conversation, Tim?
Oh, well, the first thing I think is just the acknowledging it. So we work on destigmatizing the concept. So just making sure that people understand it's not a bad thing, it is a natural thing. So beginning it is really acknowledging and understanding that it's not, you're not a bad person if you have bias, but you do have some responsibility to identify where they are and do something about it, not let them get in the way of how you treat people.
So we try to move people beyond the blame and shame conversation because that's not helpful. To sit there and tell someone that you're a terrible human being and how could you be this way just doesn't motivate anybody to want to open up and think about changing. And so we try to move people away from blame and shame and just talk about this is part of the way we're wired as human beings. We trust some people more naturally than others, and that can be problematic, and we want to figure out how we can expand the circle of people that we trust.
Is getting a group of people from different backgrounds in one room the end-all be-all?
not necessarily just getting them in the room, but
right.
Again, it's about relationships. So one of the worst things I think we've done was made political correctness the norm. We need to be able to be honest about how we're feeling, what we're thinking, and then we can help each other sort of move beyond some of the narrow-minded things that just have to do with not having exposure. So being around different kinds of people is actually a step towards solution.
But I think the end goal in our perspective is that when you look at things like healthcare, life expectancy, income, wealth, there are still disparities in our country that are directly traceable to our history. We have a history of discrimination in this country, and that leads to really widely differing outcomes. And if we're going to make any progress towards greater fairness and equality in this country, we've got to start recognizing how those patterns get replicated, and one of that is just through bias. And so if we get people together, that's a step towards, as a society, becoming a place where you can't look at a baby, look at the color of their skin, and say with any kind of certainty that they will live longer than another baby whose skin color is different. That's nonsense, right? Yeah. That happens, but we can do that, and that's a problem.
We've seen over the last couple of years the venom, the vitriol, back and forth, social media, people in people's faces. How does one address that when you hear somebody from another side, another point of view, and maybe not raise the anger level? How do you address that?
So I actually just had one of those Facebook conversations recently, and what we try to do is actually start with data. Rather than live in the land of opinion and emotion, data, there's actual information. Most of the time, people who have these strong opinions and where that vitriol exists, it's a fact. It's a matter of not being informed. So if you can show people, what Matthew just said about, we can look at two babies based on the color of their skin, and we can predict how successful they might be, how long they might live, just based on the color of their skin. That this is verifiable by lots and lots of research. So if we start with what are the actual facts, and then find places of common ground. So even with the most angry, sort of hateful rhetoric, often we are motivated by the same things. We want happiness, we do want peace, we want our families to be well. So we can start with the core commonalities, we can build from there.
How about you, Matthew?
I think finding as much common ground as you can and not letting yourself respond when you're angry. So I think one of the things that happens is when someone is angry and they say something hurtful or hateful, it triggers me emotionally when I see that or when I read that. And if I respond in that moment of anger, it's only going to continue that cycle of vitriol. And so part of what you have to do is figure out if social media is the right place to have this conversation in the first place, which often
Probably
it
not.
isn't. But certainly you can't respond from a place of your own anger because you're not going to be accessing the more thoughtful, rational part of your brain at that time anyway.
We have about 45 seconds left. Was it an interesting venture as an interracial couple writing this book?
Absolutely, absolutely. It had more to do with our working styles. So I like to just sit down and get something done. And I was actually last Thanksgiving working in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner writing chapters, and he had to.
I had to take retreats and sequester myself in a hotel room and not talk to anybody and be focused, whereas she had the kids running around, headphones on, and just typing away. I could never do that.
No social media for you in that hotel
Right,
room.
exactly.
Well, folks, thank you so much, and we really appreciate your time, and we wish you well with the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. All right, Tiffany Jana and Matthew Freeman's new book called Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Differences. It's now available.